this is RadTechShoe, and I have another Battleborn character review episode for you. And in this video, we're going to be looking at Kleese. We're going to be looking at the LLC, the Last Light Consortium's crazy old coot. We're going to be looking at his skill setup, his lore and backstory, his Helix loadout, and some tips and tricks that I have found to maximize this old-timer's effectiveness on the battlefield. So let's get right into his skill setup. His first skill is called Energy Rift. Kleese will open up an energy rift, and it restores friendly shields and damages enemies for every 3 seconds. And it starts off that maximum number of rifts on the field is 3. So Kleese creates this little energy rift. You'll see it all the time right in front of you, like right there. And it'll damage enemies every 3 seconds and restore ally shields every 3 seconds. Next up, skill 2 is Energy Mortar. Kleese will shoot a barrage of 6 mortars forward, and the enemies that it hits are, take damage, and their shields take bonus damage. Pretty useful, not my favorite. It's, I prefer Energy Rift over Energy Mortar any day of the week, but Energy Mortar is not that terrible of a move. It does have a use later on in the Helix menu, and we'll get to that in a second. His ultimate ability is called Black Hole. Kleese summons a black hole that pulls enemies in and deals significant damage to them from a distance, and it affects multiple enemies at the same time. Pretty useful. His standard R2 ability is his wrist cannon. He has infinite ammo, never needs to reload, never overheats or anything like that. Kleese will fire this little wrist cannon laser that essentially just fires in a perfectly straight line. It's pretty good for sniping, but it's definitely not what you would expect in terms of damage. It definitely lacks in the damage department. His L2 ability is a Shock Taser. Shock Taser is excellent. This is my favorite thing to do with Kleese because it locks onto enemies that are close enough to him. As long as they're relatively in front of him, it will lock onto him, and it will do significant damage, and you can keep locking onto them. So if they're trying to zigzag left and right, or if they're jumping as long as they're in front of you and they're not too far away from you, you will lock onto them and deal significant continuous damage, and it's an excellent ability. His passive ability is the Tactical Battle Chair. Kleese rolls into battle in the most deluxe of all battle furniture. It increases Kleese's maximum shield capacity per level and can be used to double jump. It does have its own energy bar in the lower left-hand corner of the screen right next to Kleese's shield and health bars, and that energy is what powers his Shock Taser and his chair's double jump. Pretty useful. Excellent, and we're going to be playing to that strength as well. So the Shock Taser is easily my favorite aspect about Kleese, immediately followed by the energy rifts, and that's really all we've got for his basic skill setup. Now let's move into his lore and backstory and try to learn more about this crazy old tyke. Now when it comes to Kleese's backstory, it's actually rather different from what I was expecting. This mostly talks about kind of like the LLC, for instance, like how the LLC introduced the Magnus, which was basically an AI that was meant to be mass-produced for consumer purposes, and how they made the Magnuses the way they are and made them controllable and made it so that they wouldn't go rampant was they introduced what was known as the Magna Carta, a computer that is so powerful it defies mathematical description. And it was pretty much like a supercomputer that when they created Magnuses, they put a little black box in there that tethered them to the Magna Carta, and it worked as a limiter. So the Magna Carta was kind of a limiter that helped keep the Magnuses in check and prevented them from going berserk. However, eventually they went completely bonkers when the Magna Carta just somehow crashed. Like the Magna Carta went down and it went offline, and there's something, and all of a sudden, Magnuses like, for instance, Isaac or Marquis, they started going a little haywire. So Kleese sent a message out to Galt saying, "Hey, look, I'm that guy that worked with you a few years ago on a different planet. I called you a moron. Can you please come over here and help save me? Because the Magnuses are starting to go crazy, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to last." So Kleese and Galt have some history together. They probably met on a different planet. It was most likely Penarch or one of the other star systems before all this Solus stuff came about, and before Galt eventually recruited him to being a Battleborn. But Kleese and Galt have some history together, and the Last Light Consortium mostly, that Kleese is in charge of. They're the ones that kind of introduced the Magna Carta and the Magnuses, and is part of the reason why we have to deal with, lunatics like Marquis and Isaac today. The only other thing about his lore that I can understand is really about, the battle throne, the little chair that Kleese sits in. It floats. It has, a couple drink holders from the looks of it that also function as the controls for Kleese to use. It's got a footrest. It's got emergency rapid deployment shielding in case of an event, in the event of panic. Standard issue mortar and energy rift, and that's really not. There's really not much else to Kleese's lore or backstory, other than his full name is Gunnar Kleese. He's the lead robot designer for Minion Robotics and the interim CEO of Minion Robotics. And he's somewhat affiliated with Phoebe and Eldragon. I covered it in their backstory, but they kind of know each other a little bit. He eventually created the arms that Eldragon would use after Eldragon's arms were ripped off by Isaac. And then Phoebe was recruited into the LLC per request of Kleese, because he recognizes her talent, even though he thinks that she's kind of like a snobby little princess. And that's really what Kleese is. He's like an crazy old coot who knows a lot about robotics, and Galt saw him as an asset that he needed to recruit, and the rest is history. And that's all there is for his lore and backstory. Not much else to Kleese, other than that he's an expert robotics person, and him and the Last Light Consortium are partially responsible for the creation of the Magnuses and the chaos that they ultimately caused when the Magna Carta went down. And that's really it for Kleese's lore and backstory. So now we're going to move over to the Helix loadout, and I want to show you the setup that I have for Kleese and how I like to play him, and how I like to set him up in the battlefield to be as efficient as possible against my opponents. Alright, so first up, level 1, we're going to go with Shocking Pulse. Energy Rift will shock nearby enemies, dealing bonus shield damage. What this allows Kleese to do is when he deploys Energy Rifts, they deal bonus damage to their opponent's shields, meaning we get to their permanent health faster and allowing us to kill them faster. So it's pretty excellent there. I like Energy Rift, and we're going to try and augment it to be as effective as possible. Next up, level 2, I like to go with Shiftless Shells. Energy Mortars will slow enemy targets when they hit. So this is excellent. It allows me to keep on enemies. It prevents them from escaping easier, and it enables it so that my teammates can focus on that enemy, and it'll increase the chances of them dying. Next up, level 3, I like to go with Don't Tase Me Bro. Shock Taser now arcs to additional targets. It's only one additional target, but that means that when Kleese is targeting one enemy, if there's another enemy next to that opponent, whether it be a Battleborn or a little minion robot, they will take damage as well, meaning so that when I kill that first target, that second target has already been weakened and is much closer to death than they would be if I didn't have Don't Tase Me Bro. Next up, level 4. I like to go with Rift Network. Energy rifts will now link to each other when near each other, and their output will be increased times the number of rifts in the network. So if I got 3 on the board and they're all close to each other and they're linked to one another, that means when one of them does their little pulse for damage, instead of it doing the normal damage, it'll do 3 times as much damage, and that's for each one. So if they're all close to one another, whenever these things pulse, they're going to take away chunks of my opponent's shield and their health. This can be really excellent defensively when you put it around corners, and I like this. I like Rift Network a lot, and it's definitely my go-to pick for number 4. Next up, level 5, I go with Extended Battery Life, increasing Kleese's tactical battle chair energy by 10. This makes it so that my Shock Taser has more time to it, and it can shock enemies and deal more damage over time. The additional hover energy is really, I don't use Kleese's hover ability all that much. It's all about his Shock Taser for me, and plus 10 battle chair energy is just excellent for that. Next up, level 6, I go with Bulk Savings. Kleese can have additional energy rifts alive in the world at the same time, plus 1 rift, so that instead of his maximum energy rifts of 3, he can now have 4. Now, for another alternative, you can go with Rift Farm, decreasing energy rifts cooldown. If you're having trouble keeping your energy rifts alive on the battlefield and your opponents keep killing them because they know how to counter Kleese, Rift Farm is a good alternative, and it allows you to spin out and shoot through more energy rifts on the battlefield. It allows you to put out more of them and fight back and try and fight for that setup. Next up, level 7, I like to go with tampered mortars. Energy mortars now fire all at the same time, blanketing an area. Instead of Kleese firing his energy mortars 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, he just fires them all at once in one big volley. This means that any enemy in front of you is pretty much guaranteed to be hit. And the other bonus is, since we've added slow to that, now they're afflicted with slow, and another bonus to that is the skill is over with immediately now. Instead of it taking about almost 2 seconds for Kleese to fire all of his mortars, now he just fires them all instantly, and you can immediately follow it up with a shock taser and start working on your opponent's health and try and kill them before they even have a chance to escape. Next up, level 8, I like to go with brawn before brains. I like the shock taser, so increasing its damage, you really can't go wrong with this. Now we're doing more damage over time, and we're just killing our opponents faster. You can go with brains before brawn. If Kleese is dying too often, you can definitely go with that, but I prefer brawn before brain because I have no difficulty playing with Kleese and having fun with him and killing people. Next up, level 9. You can go with quick pulse or healthy rift. Either one is good. I prefer quick pulse just so that I can deal more damage to my opponents in a shorter time, over time. Healthy rift is good, just like our level 5 augmentation rift farm. If your opponents are killing your rifts off too quickly, healthy rift can be a good way to combat this and make it so that you can get that set up a little easier. Quick pulse is my preferred go-to thing because I put my energy rifts in smart places and make it so that my opponents don't have the easiest time destroying them. At least they're going to get a fight out of me if they want to destroy them. Next up is insta-hole. Black hole's time to pull enemies is greatly reduced. This makes it so that when I throw down my black hole, it gives my opponents less time to react. They'll get sucked in, and then I can start damaging them, or I can get away. Either one is good. Square root of pain and sharing is caring. Never did like any of them. Not saying they're terrible. I just never gravitated towards them. I preferred the insta-hole right when I unlocked it, just because I'm just like, okay, excellent. This is perfect. This is more beneficial to me than sharing is caring or square root of pain. And that's all I've got for this video and for his Helix loadout. Now we're going to go back to the gameplay of the video, and I'm going to go over tips and tricks that I found to use this old geezer on the battlefield as effectively as possible. So when it comes to gear and equipment, I like to use chest armor to increase his maximum health and body armor to increase the damage reduction. And then gauntlets are excellent for increasing his base damage, not only for his little wrist pistol, his wrist laser thing, but also his taser. His taser is going to be what gets you a great majority of his kills, and increasing the base attack damage that he does is excellent. One thing I definitely recommend that you do is you don't play too ballsy with Kleese. Like what I did right there, I was deep in enemy lines. You want to play more on your side of the battlefield. You don't want to push deep into enemy territory unless you're on a very good team. And that's one of the best things about Kleese. Kleese, once he gets his setup, it's all about that energy rift setup. Once Kleese gets his setup with all of his energy rifts, he is excellent at maintaining a good position. However, if you notice, when you put an energy rift right down there in the middle and it's not well hidden and it doesn't do much, it'll get instantly killed. It won't accomplish much over there. So I strongly recommend that you try, if you have to throw down an energy rift to try and keep yourself alive, to try and damage it, if like what I'm doing right here, just trying to get this Montana kill and then I run away and then I gotta dodge all the enemies, but unfortunately Thorn gets me right here. But if you're trying to play Kleese as effectively as possible, don't always do the things that I do. I was trying out a variety of strategies with Kleese. I was playing around trying to see just how good I can get with him, see if Kleese can be an aggressive player. I found that Kleese is best defensively played. He's great in incursion game modes when your team is attacking the enemy boss, the enemy, spider walker, and you're using the walls to set up your energy rifts behind, and making it so that your opponents have to come into your line of sight, and they have to come around a corner and then turn like 90 degrees, almost turning their back to you, just so that they can destroy your energy rifts. Energy rifts need to be very well placed. Putting them out in the open like this is actually very ineffective. It's just sometimes you'll find opponents who are so focused on trying to kill you, they'll ignore your energy rifts, and that's really, really bad on their part. That's a terrible idea on their part to try and do that. But for some reason, I was lucky and I encountered some pretty, bad enemies. However, I really have to stress the importance of this. It is important that you play very smart with Kleese. He's similar to Galt. He's all about that setup. You get a good setup with Kleese by setting up his energy rifts, and your opponents are not going to be able to challenge your position so easily. In a one-on-one scenario, Kleese can actually destroy someone very quickly. Now, they're going to have to challenge in groups, and when that happens, that's when Kleese can hit them with mortars to slow them all down, and hopefully your allies can rally to help Kleese and prevent Kleese's position from being completely overrun. Kleese is definitely a fun character to play as. However, he requires a good amount of patience. He's not the best in terms of just overall damage and survivability. He can actually die very easily if you don't know what you're doing. I'd strongly recommend that you be patient with Kleese and you don't try and focus so much on, it's not his skills. His shock taser is going to be what gives you all these kills and get you assists and stuff like that. His energy rifts are there primarily to keep his shield up, to keep his allies' shield up. They're essentially there to create a lane of traffic for your teammates. It's a free lane for your teammates and not a free lane for your opponents. That's really all that they do. You got to get that set up. And if you notice, I'm throwing them out one at a time, and they're dying. This is where you want to do them. You want to put them in areas where it forces your opponents to come into an area where they're going to come in contact with the energy rifts. And tethering them together, linking them together is excellent. It is so dang effective. I just can't stress that enough. And you got to be able to pick your spots with Kleese. Kleese is not an easy character to pick up and just all of a sudden tear it up. So put your energy rifts in good spots around corners. Play defensively when necessary. You can push up, but you've got to find good spots. There are not a lot of maps that have good areas for Kleese to throw his energy rifts to the point where they're all where they all reach their maximum potential. His energy rifts are not exactly the easiest thing to set up because a lot of maps just don't have the design to complement Kleese's energy rifts. But I strongly recommend that you be patient with Kleese, that you give him the amount of effort and time and respect he deserves. He is definitely a worthy opponent on the battlefield when played correctly. You're just going to have to be patient when using him. One of the biggest problems I encountered were enemy Montanas. Montana can actually tear through Kleese pretty quickly if they're effective. If they're not effective and if they're just constantly doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, enemy Montanas can still be a problem, but they're not nearly as problematic as they would be. Other characters really aren't so much of a problem. Galilea, she's a problem for a lot of characters, but not too much of a problem for Kleese. His energy rifts are really his bread and butter when it comes to his skills, and then you just focus on using your shock taser on enemies as they're trying to focus on you. Stick and dodge and weave around your energy rifts so that they can constantly keep giving you shields and give your allies shields and constantly damaging and draining your opponents. That's really one of the best things I like to do, is try and get a good setup. Focus on killing waves of ads so that you can keep leveling up with Kleese, because Kleese is actually, in my opinion, kind of slow to level up, because right off the bat he's not effective at killing enemy Battleborn. He's kind of slow in that respect. But once you get your energy rift setups going, that's when Kleese becomes very effective. I'm able to constantly keep my shields high. Enemies want to try and damage me, they're going to have to take out my energy rifts first, and a lot of melee characters are at a disadvantage there, because that means they're going to have to come into my lane of traffic, into my area of damage, where they're going to have to come into range of my shock taser if they want to try and destroy some of my energy rifts if they're melee characters. Thorn, Marquis, Oscar, Mike, Montana, they can destroy my energy rifts no problem from a distance, but setups like this are what he's all about, or what Kleese is. He's all about this type of a setup. You just kind of stay there, you don't really care about the enemies all that much, and you notice, an entire wave of ads just went down effortlessly in like 2 seconds. And it provides a free lane of traffic for my allies. My opponents really are going to have a struggle one-on-one engagement-wise trying to take this area from me once Kleese gets his setup. So that's really what Kleese is all about. He's about a setup and maintaining that setup. And that's really all I've got for Kleese. He's fun, he's a little difficult, he's He's very effective once you get the hang of him, and that's all I've got for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, subscribe, comment down below, stay tuned for more, and I will see you guys all later. This is RadTech Shoes signing off.